There is a particular quality of confidence that tips, without warning and without the consent of the person carrying it, into something else entirely. It is not arrogance in the obvious sense, not the loud, self-advertising kind that announces itself and invites the audience to decide how it feels. It is subtler than that. It is the confidence of a man who has been told, often enough and by enough reliable sources, that he is exceptional, and who has arrived at the reasonable but dangerous conclusion that exceptionalism is a fixed condition rather than a daily practice. It is the confidence of a man who has stopped checking his assumptions against reality, because reality has, up to this point, been reliably cooperative. Darnell Booker was 44 years old, a former college football player turned mortgage broker from Charlotte, North Carolina, and he walked into the Family Feud studio on a Thursday afternoon in June 2020 for the way he walked into most rooms, like the room had been expecting him, and was glad he had arrived. He was charming. He was physically imposing in the comfortable, unintimidating way of an athlete who has maintained his build past his playing years. He had a handshake that communicated competence, and a smile that communicated confidence, and a laugh that suggested he had already decided everything was going to go well. He told his family in the green room before the taping, studied this show. Not the way Loretta Mee Franklin had studied it, not with notebooks and years of systematic analysis and a theory of survey psychology refined through thousands of examples. He had watched, he said, a few episodes. He knew how it worked. He had good instincts. He had performed well under pressure his entire career. How hard could it be? His wife Renee, who had been married to Darnell for 19 years and had developed a precise internal taxonomy of his confidence states and what each one tended to produce, exchanged a brief look with her sister-in-law across the green room. The look communicated several things efficiently. It communicated, "Here we go." It communicated, "There is nothing to be done about this now." And it communicated, with the affectionate resignation of someone who has spent 19 years inside the specific comedy of a particular person's most consistent blind spot, "At least it will be entertaining." She was correct. It would be entertaining. It would also, before the afternoon was over, become something more than that. Something that a studio audience of 200 people would receive not as comedy, but as the kind of honest, unscripted human moment that television almost never produces intentionally and occasionally produces by complete accident. When a person goes far enough into their own certainty that the distance back becomes visible to everyone watching. Steve Harvey, during the pre-show walkthrough, shook Darnell's hand and said, with the professional warmth of a man who has met every variety of contestant in his career, "You look ready." "Born ready," Darnell said. Steve Harvey smiled. He had heard this before. He had heard it from people who were right and from people who were not, and he had learned 30 years ago to tell the difference. He filed his assessment quietly and moved on. Darnell Booker had grown up in Rock Hill, South Carolina, the oldest of 4 children born to a high school football coach and a church administrator who together had constructed a household in which excellence was not a goal but an expectation. His father, Coach Raymond Booker, known as Coach Ray to every student he had ever worked with, a fact that Darnell mentioned with visible pride at every available opportunity, had coached high school football for 31 years and had produced from that tenure 7 players who went on to play at the college level and 2 who reached professional teams. He was a man whose entire professional life had been organized around the proposition that potential was nothing without discipline, and who communicated this proposition not through speeches, but through the unrelenting, daily experience of being held to a standard. Darnell had been the most naturally talented of his father's 4 children, and had known it from early enough that the knowledge had time to become, in the way such knowledge sometimes does, both an asset and a liability. He had the physical gifts, the size, the speed, the coordination that made him the obvious choice for every team he had ever tried for. He had the social gifts too, the ease, the charisma, the ability to command a room by simply entering it. What he had in more variable supply was his father's discipline. Not because he lacked the character for it, but because his natural gifts had, up to a certain point, made discipline feel optional. Things had come easily enough for long enough that the habit of working hard at something that did not feel difficult had not fully taken root. He had played college football at a mid-major program in the Carolinas on a full scholarship, started for 3 of his 4 years, and been briefly, genuinely considered for the draft before a knee injury in his senior year closed that possibility more abruptly than he had prepared for. This was the first time in Darnell Booker's life that something significant had not gone the way his confidence had projected, and it had affected him in ways that he had processed incompletely and which had left a residue. The residue was not bitterness. He was too gregarious and too forward-facing for sustained bitterness. It was something more specific, a slight overcorrection in the direction of certainty. A reflex developed in the years after the injury of presenting more confidence than he actually possessed in situations where the outcome was genuinely uncertain. As a form of psychological insurance against the specific variety of disappointment, he had felt on the afternoon a team doctor told him his knee would not recover in time for draft consideration. He had built a good life. The mortgage business suited his personality, client-facing, relationship-dependent, requiring the ability to make people feel at ease in circumstances that were financially stressful. He was, his colleagues said, one of the best closers in the Charlotte office. His clients trusted him. His family was solid and warm and in the way of families that have a genuinely funny person at their center, regularly and helplessly entertained by the person at their center. Renee had married him knowing exactly who he was. She had made that decision with full information and had not subsequently regretted it, which was the most complete form of the endorsement available. She found his confidence endearing when it was proportionate to the situation and bracingly familiar when it was not. And she had developed, over 19 years, a skill for the specific kind of support that Darnell needed in the moments when the gap between his projection and his performance became visible. Present without commentary, steady without condescension, waiting with the patience of someone who knows the person in question is capable of learning and has learned before. Their family team for Family Feud consisted of Darnell, Renee, Darnell's younger brother Kevin, Kevin's teenage daughter Amara, and Darnell's mother Gloria, a 70-year-old woman of such consolidated personal authority that her presence on any team was considered by everyone who knew her to be the most significant strategic variable. Gloria Booker had been watching Family Feud for 30 years. She had opinions about it that were specific, structured, and correct. She had shared these opinions, repeatedly and with declining patience, during the 3 days the family had spent together before the taping. Darnell had listened to them in the way that confident men sometimes listen to the people who know best, attentively on the surface, without fully landing underneath. Gloria had noticed. She had said nothing further. She had instead done what she always did when Darnell did not take her advice. She had waited, with the composed certainty of a woman who had been right about her son more times than she could count, for the moment the situation would make her point on her behalf. The main game began well for the Booker family. Kevin was quick and accurate at the face-off podium. Amara, 17 and constitutionally unconcerned with pressure, delivered 2 consecutive #1 answers in round 1 that sent the audience into genuine appreciation and caused Darnell to turn to his family with the expression of a man whose pre-game projections are being confirmed in real time. Gloria, standing at the end of the family line, smiled at her granddaughter with the smile she reserved for performances that met her standards, which was a selective enough honor that Amara quietly marked it. The opposing family, the Nguyen family from Houston, led by a 52-year-old pharmacist named Linda, who moved through the main game with the economical precision of a woman who had done her research, kept the score close enough that it never felt settled. Round 2 went to the Nguyens on a strike and steal that briefly silenced the Booker side of the stage. Round 3 came back to the Bookers on Gloria's single intervention. She was asked one question, gave one answer, and the answer was #1 for 38 points, after which she stepped back into her position with the unhurried dignity of a woman who had made her point and required no further discussion. By round 4, Darnell had not yet played a significant role. He had been present, enthusiastic, and consistently louder in his celebration of the family's correct answers than any individual answer strictly warranted. Steve Harvey had noted this with the peripheral attention he maintained for contestants who were performing rather than competing. He had seen it before. He knew where it tended to lead. The Bookers won the main game by 11 points, which was a margin that felt larger than it was a product of a strong final round rather than consistent dominance. As the partition went up for fast money, Darnell turned to his family with the full projection of a man who had been waiting for this moment and had already internally completed it. "This is where we win it," he said. Renee said, "Darnell." "I got it," he said. Gloria did not say anything. She touched Amara's arm lightly, a gesture Amara understood to mean, "Watch." The family had agreed in the planning conversations before the taping that Darnell would go first in fast money. This had been Darnell's suggestion, which he had framed as strategic, get a strong foundation, let the anchor come in with a clear target, and which everyone else had recognized as Darnell wanting the podium first. No one had argued. The argument would have been brief and unproductive, and the situation was going to make the point more effectively than any of them could. Darnell walked to the fast money podium with the walk that had carried him through 20 years of professional life, the measured, unhurried walk of a man who was comfortable in the spotlight and had decided the spotlight was comfortable right back. He gripped both sides of the podium. He looked at Steve Harvey. He nodded once with the quick economy of a quarterback signaling to a referee. "I'm ready," he said. Steve Harvey looked at him for a moment. "All right then," he said. 20 seconds, here we go. Name something people do to kill time. Darnell said confidently and without hesitation, "Play golf." A small, involuntary sound moved through the studio audience. Not laughter, something more restrained. The sound an audience makes when it knows an answer has missed and is being polite about it. Name something a dog does when its owner comes home. Jumps up. Name something you find in a medicine cabinet. Aspirin. Name something people do on a first date. A half-second pause, the first hesitation of the round, and then, go to dinner. Name a reason someone might call in sick when they're not. Darnell's jaw moved slightly. He said, "Golf." He had already said golf. The realization arrived on his face approximately 1 second after the word left his mouth, with the particular expression of a man who has just understood that the 60 seconds he prepared for in his imagination and the 60 seconds he is currently inside are two different rooms. The buzzer sounded. Steve Harvey turned to the board with the professional composure of a man who has learned to hold his expression neutral through a very wide range of outcomes. He read the answers. Play golf not on the board. The audience made the sound again, slightly less restrained this time. Jumps up, number 3 answer, 12 points. Aspirin, number 2 answer, 19 points. Go to dinner, number 1 answer, 34 points. Golf, the repeated answer, 0 points. Strike. Total, 65 points. The studio was not silent. The studio had the quality of 200 people exercising restraint in the specific, collective way of an audience that is choosing kindness over the more available response. Steve Harvey looked at the scoreboard. He looked at Darnell. He said with perfect composure, 65 points. Darnell stood at the podium. He was not visibly shattered. He was, and this was what the audience found most compelling and most human about the moment, processing. Working through the gap between where he had been 30 seconds ago and where he was now, with the specific, undefended expression of a man who is too honest with himself to pretend the gap is smaller than it is. "I said golf twice," he said. "You did," Steve Harvey confirmed. "I panicked. A little." Darnell exhaled once, long and slow, through his nose. Then he looked up and found his family behind the partition and said, loud enough for the microphone to catch it, "Mama, I'm sorry." Gloria's voice came back immediately. "Boy, get off that stage so Renee can fix it." The audience, which had been holding its restraint with genuine effort, released entirely. The laughter was warm rather than cruel, the laughter of people who recognized something true about human confidence and its relationship to the moments that test it, and who found the recognition tender rather than satisfying. Steve Harvey laughed too, fully and without management, and the laughter reorganized the room from something tense into something human. Renee stepped to the podium. Renee Booker was 42 years old. She was a high school English teacher who had spent 17 years helping teenagers understand that the distance between what you mean to say and what you actually say is where most of the important work of being a person takes place. She was not loud. She was not performing. She placed both hands on the podium with the settled quality of someone who has been waiting for her turn and knows exactly what to do with it. She needed 135 points to win the $20,000. In the recorded history of the show, 135 points from a single fast money player had been achieved, but rarely. It required not just good answers, but great ones, multiple number 1 responses, no wasted seconds, no hesitation in the wrong places. Steve Harvey looked at her. Renee looked at the board. The studio had gone quiet again, but this was a different quiet from the one that had followed Darnell's score. This was the quiet of an audience that has realigned its attention towards something it has decided to take seriously. "Renee," Steve Harvey said, "you ready?" She did not say born ready. She said, "Yes. 20 seconds, here we go. Name something people do to kill time." Without hesitation, not a flicker of the doubt that had preceded Darnell's identical opening, scroll their phone. Name something a dog does when its owner comes home. Wags its tail. Name something you find in a medicine cabinet. Band-aids. Name something people do on a first date. Talk too much. Name a reason someone might call in sick when they're not. A half-second, the only pause of the round, and then with the specific precision of a woman who has spent 19 years watching a specific man navigate specific situations. Needs a break. The buzzer sounded. Steve Harvey turned to the board. The board turned back. Scroll their phone, number one answer, 47 points. The audience began to rise. Wags its tail, number one answer, 38 points. The standing section expanded rapidly. Band-Aids, number one answer, 31 points. Steve Harvey's head dropped briefly, the involuntary response of a man absorbing something remarkable. Talk too much, number two answer, 24 points. The room was entirely on its feet. And then the last answer, needs a break for a reason someone might call in sick when they're not. Steve Harvey paused. He turned to Renee. She was standing completely still with the expression of someone who has finished the thing they came to do and is waiting for the confirmation. Survey said. The board turned. Number one answer, 29 points. Total 169 points. Combined score 234 points. The $20,000 was won. The studio erupted in the way it erupts when the resolution of a tension exceeds the scale the tension implied. When a room has spent several minutes inside a story that appeared to be heading toward one ending and has instead arrived at a completely different one. The Booker family came through the partition in a surge. Kevin was shouting something no microphone caught cleanly. Amara, 17 and constitutionally unconcerned with pressure, was crying, which was the most surprising thing she had done all afternoon. Gloria moved through the celebration with the composure of a woman who had known this was possible and had waited with appropriate patience for it to become actual. Darnell stood at the edge of the stage. He watched his wife complete what he had not. His face went through several things in quick succession: relief, pride, something more complex and more honest than either of those, and then settled on an expression that the people who knew him best would later say they had not seen on him since the afternoon the team doctor gave him the news about his knee. Not defeat. Not humiliation. The expression of a man who has encountered the precise boundary of his own confidence and found, on the other side of it, something more instructive than success. Renee came off the podium and walked directly to him. She did not say anything. She put her hand on his arm once, briefly, in the specific way of someone who has 19 years of practice, communicating what matters most in the smallest available gesture. He nodded. Steve Harvey looked at the two of them and made a decision that he had made several times over the course of his career. The decision to go toward the real thing rather than the entertaining version of it. He came to stand with Darnell and spoke quietly, not reaching for the camera. "How you doing, brother?" Darnell looked at him. "Honestly, I'm embarrassed." "I know," Steve said, "but I want to tell you something. You're embarrassed because you care. A man who didn't care would be laughing it off right now. You're standing here feeling it. That's the right response." Darnell nodded slowly. "I told myself I was ready and I wasn't ready." "No," Steve agreed. "You told yourself you were ready." "That's not the same as being ready." The audience was very quiet. "The difference," Steve said, "is the work. Your wife did the work. I don't know what that looked like specifically, but I know it from the way she stood up there. She wasn't performing. She was just delivering what she'd already prepared." He paused. "You came up here performing. She came up here prepared. That's the whole story." Darnell was quiet for a moment. Then he said, with the directness of a man who has decided that the moment has earned honesty, "My mother told me the same thing 3 days ago." From the other end of the stage, Gloria's voice arrived, carrying the warmth and the edge in the exact proportions she had always managed them. "He knows what I said." The audience laughed again, and this time Darnell laughed too, a real laugh, the first fully unguarded sound he had made all afternoon, and the room received it with the specific warmth of people who have watched a person arrive, through a difficult and public route, at something that was true about themselves. The episode aired 4 weeks after the taping. The clip, structured by the internet's instinct for narrative, which cuts to the essentials when the essentials are available, circulated in 2 distinct versions. The first was Darnell's fast money round alone, 60 seconds that managed to be simultaneously painful, deeply relatable, and genuinely funny in the specific way of something that is true rather than performed. The second was the longer cut, Darnell's round, Gloria's voice from behind the partition, Renee's round, and Steve Harvey's quiet conversation with Darnell at the edge of the stage. This version circulated more widely and more durably. It was the version people sent to someone they knew. The responses it generated were, by the show's reckoning, among the most personal they had received for a non-reunion episode. People wrote in not about Renee's performance, though they admired it, but about Darnell's. They wrote about the specific feeling of walking into a room more confident than prepared. They wrote about the moments in their own lives when the gap between those two states had become visible in circumstances less forgiving than a game show stage. They wrote about the particular quality of the embarrassment, the kind that arrives not from external judgment, but from the honest encounter with your own assumptions, and what it had felt like to watch someone else experience it and not look away from it. Several people wrote specifically about Gloria, about the voice from behind the partition, about the particular authority of a parent who had been right and had waited and had made their point by letting the situation speak. A number of writers, the show's producers noted this with some interest, were adult children writing about their own parents, about the advice they had received and not taken, about the conversations they had decided to revisit. Darnell did not watch the clip immediately when the episode aired. He waited 4 days, which was the amount of time it took him to feel that the distance between himself and what had happened was sufficient for honest viewing. When he watched it with Renee, and he watched the whole version, not just his fast money round, but the complete sequence through Steve Harvey's conversation with him at the edge of the stage. He called his mother the next morning. He told her he had watched it. She said she knew he had. She had been watching the clip counter on the family group chat. He asked her how she had known, 3 days before the taping, that he wasn't ready. She told him what she always told him when he asked her how she knew things about him that he hadn't disclosed. She had been watching him his whole life, and some things did not require disclosure because they were visible from the outside to anyone paying close enough attention. He asked her why she hadn't pushed harder when he didn't take the advice. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Because you needed to learn it in a room where it was only embarrassing, not damaging." I have been waiting for the right room for a while. That was the right room. Darnell was quiet for a long time after that. Then he said, "You staged this." Gloria said, "I applied for the show. I did not stage anything. The situation staged itself. That is what situations do when you give them enough room." It was, Darnell told colleagues at the office later that week, the most Gloria sentence he had ever heard his mother produce. His colleagues, most of whom had met Gloria at the office Christmas party 3 years prior, agreed without reservation. The professional implications of the episode were, in Darnell's own assessment, unexpectedly positive. Several of his existing clients sent messages, warmly, with the specific affection of people who appreciated seeing someone they respected in an unguarded moment and finding the person still intact on the other side of it. 2 new clients came to him in the month following the broadcast and mentioned in their first meetings that they had seen the clip and had appreciated the quality he had demonstrated not in the fast money round itself, but in the conversation afterward. The willingness to say, directly and without performance, that he had told himself he was ready and had not been ready, and to receive the correction with honesty rather than deflection. One of those clients was a 58-year-old retired teacher who told Darnell in their second meeting that she had sent the clip to her adult son with a note that said only, "This is what I have been trying to explain." Darnell told her he appreciated the note. She told him she appreciated the example. They both understood without specifying it what had been exchanged. Renee's performance did not receive less attention, it received different attention. The conversation around her was more focused and more direct than the conversation around Darnell, which tended toward the reflective. People watching Renee commented on the specificity of her final answer. Needs a break, for a reason someone might call in sick when they're not exhaustion, not a better offer, not a doctor's appointment. Needs a break. The most human answer in the round and the one that had landed as number 1. When a reporter from a Birmingham lifestyle publication asked Renee about that answer in an interview 3 months after the episode aired, she thought about it with the considered attention she brought to questions her students asked her when they were actually asking something larger than the surface question. "I teach English," she said. "I have been reading people for 17 years in a classroom and for 19 years in a marriage. I know what exhaustion looks like and I know what needing a break looks like, and they are not the same thing. Exhaustion is a physical state. Needing a break is an honest acknowledgement of your own limits. 100 people surveyed were going to recognize the honest one." She paused. "Also," she said, "I had just watched my husband say golf twice. I needed a break to be on the board." The interview quote circulated independently and received, by Renee's account, more direct messages than anything else associated with the episode. From teachers, from spouses, from people who recognize the specific competence of someone who has learned, through long practice, to read the room accurately and respond to what is actually there rather than what they hoped would be there. 6 months after the taping, Steve Harvey opened the follow-up segment by saying that of all the episodes in that season, the one that had generated the most sustained personal correspondence was not the twin sisters' reunion, which had generated the highest volume, but this one. It had generated the most letters. Letters, he said, not messages. Actual letters in envelopes which people had sat down and written by hand because the subject matter had felt to them like it warranted the deliberateness of handwriting. He asked Darnell, sitting across from him with Renee beside him, what the 6 months had been like. Darnell thought about it in the way he was increasingly doing, less quickly, with more tolerance for the pause. I spent a lot of time being embarrassed, he said. Not of the clip, of the pattern the clip was showing me. Because once you've seen it on a screen, it's hard to unsee it in yourself. He looked at Renee. I've been working on it, preparing for things instead of projecting about them. It is a lot more work than projecting, and it is a lot more reliable. Steve Harvey nodded. He turned to Gloria, who had come with the family for the follow-up and was sitting in the audience with the composed patience of a woman who was watching events she had anticipated arrive on their own schedule. Gloria, he said. Anything you want to add? Gloria considered this for a moment. He was always capable of this, she said. I just needed him to find out. She said it without drama. She said it the way she said most things, plainly, from evidence, without the need for it to land as anything other than what it was. It landed anyway. The audience received it with the quiet that greets a true thing said simply, which is a different quality from the quiet that precedes a revelation or follows a surprise. It is the quiet of recognition, of 200 people hearing something stated that they already knew, in a form that made the knowing feel new. The story of Darnell and Renee Booker is, in the end, a story about the distance between confidence and preparation. Two things that are easily confused because they can look identical from the outside until the 60 seconds arrives when they must be distinguished from the inside. It is a story about what happens when a person meets that distance publicly and honestly, and about the particular value of the people in your life who have seen it coming long before you did and have been, with love and patience, waiting for the right room. It is also a story about a woman who stood at a podium with 135 points to make and made them without performing, without hesitating in the wrong places, and without saying golf twice. This is not a small thing to be. Renee Booker would tell you so herself if you asked. She would also tell you that the most satisfying part of the afternoon was not the board confirming her answers. It was the moment she walked off the podium and saw the expression on her husband's face, not embarrassment anymore, not the defended version of it, but the open, unguarded look of a man who has just understood something about himself that he needed to understand and is, in the complicated, necessary way of people who grow, grateful for the room that made him understand it. She had known he would get there. She had been preparing for 19 years.